They say coming home feels like slipping into an old coat, familiar, worn, maybe a little tight in places you'd rather not admit. But for me, it felt more like stepping into a memory I hadn't agreed to revisit. It was just past 6:30 a.m. early autumn, and the Amtrak station looked like time had given up on it years ago. The brick walls were stained, windows clouded with grime, and a faint scent of diesel mixed with the sharp bitterness of overbrewed coffee hung in the air. I stood there in a wool coat that wasn't quite enough for the chill, clutching a worn leather bag and pretending like I hadn't been staring at the timetable for 10 minutes straight. My name's Madeline, 36, and this was the first time in over a decade I'd stepped foot in my hometown. I'd like to say I returned for closure or some noble sense of forgiveness. Truth is, I'm not sure why I came back. Maybe to prove I could. Maybe to see if they still saw me as the weak one. There's a saying I heard an old man once mumble at a bar in Cincinnati: sometimes home isn't where the heart is, but where the hurt began. I've carried that one with me for years. I didn't know then how much weight it'd carry now. The platform was cold underfoot. My boots made that hollow clunk against the concrete that echoed louder than it should have in the silence. Around me, a few commuters sat hunched over newspapers, nursing coffee like it was the only thing keeping them upright. The low mechanical hum in the distance warned the train was near. I reached inside my coat and wrapped my fingers around the silver locket that always hung around my neck. The metal was cold, grounding. It used to belong to my mother, my real one, not the woman who sent that email 3 weeks ago that simply said, "Welcome back." No punctuation, just those 2 words that didn't feel welcoming at all. Delphine always had a way of making threats sound like blessings. The train groaned into the station like an old man with aching joints. I waited until the last few people had boarded before stepping up. The metal steps vibrated under me. A familiar sensation. I used to love trains. They meant escape, adventure. Now, they just felt like obligation. Inside, the car smelled like a mix of plastic, coffee, and something stale I couldn't quite place. I slid into a window seat, tucking my bag by my feet. A man across the aisle glanced at me, then returned to his crossword. I wondered who he was heading home to. Wife? Kids? Or maybe no one. Maybe he liked the quiet. The last time I rode a train into this town, I was 11. Back then, I had a suitcase too big for my arms and eyes too wide for my face. I remember thinking the world was going to be okay. That's the kind of faith only children are allowed to carry. Now, every bump of the track felt like it was shaking loose another piece of my resolve. I watched the trees blur by, reds and golds of early fall flashing past like forgotten promises. A whisper of fear crept in. Will they still see me the same? Weak, soft, easy to blame. "You can't go home again," Wolf said. Maybe he was right. The ride was short, but every second stretched longer than it had any right to. My mind raced faster than the train ever could, and then it stopped. The town hadn't changed much. The same diner smell of grease and sugar drifted over from across the street. Posters from long-gone county fairs still peeled on the walls. Nostalgia? No. Just a reminder that some places don't grow, they just rust. I stepped onto the platform. The chill hit harder here. Or maybe it was the woman waiting at the end of it, Delphine Mortimer. Her smile was wide, bright, but it never reached her eyes. She wore pearls too perfect for this hour, and heels that clicked too loud on cracked cement. She opened her arms like some holy matron, but the air between us felt like glass, thin, fragile, about to shatter. "Welcome back," she said, stepping closer. And just as I moved in for a cold, obligatory embrace, she reached out and gripped my wrist. Hard. Her nails dug in just enough, just long enough. And then she pulled back with that same smile. I didn't flinch, didn't wince, just looked her in the eye. Has your welcome back ever felt like a warning? I wanted to ask someone, anyone, but I just smiled in return. Inside, I wasn't afraid. I was reading her, cataloging. She thought she still had the upper hand. She hadn't realized. I came back different. As we walked side by side toward the parking lot, her voice chirped about how the house hadn't changed, how my room was just as I left it. Lies. Always layered in syrup. I clutched the locket in my palm, not for comfort, but as a reminder. Time we pulled into the driveway, dusk had blurred the lines of the houses. The house looked off. The porch was new. The mailbox had changed. No longer just Mortimer. Now it read, The Mortimers. I stepped out of the car and stared at the lettering. Subtle, maybe, but deliberate, like the house had decided I no longer belonged. Inside, the air didn't smell like cinnamon anymore, no faint trace of my mother's vanilla candles. Instead, lemon cleaner and some overly floral plug-in assaulted my senses. The furniture was newer, neutral tones. The kind that looked like they belonged in a catalog. None of the old family photos were in the hallway. I scanned the walls, trying to find at least one picture of me as a kid. Nothing. "You'll be in the guest room," Delphine said, already halfway up the stairs. "Talia's working on some projects, so your old room, well, it has better use now." Better use. That stung more than I expected. I followed her up. At the end of the hall, I turned instinctively to the left, toward the room that used to be mine. The door was ajar. Inside, the walls were a soft gray blue. A sewing table sat where my desk used to be, bolts of fabric stacked in the closet. A half-finished dress hung from a mannequin. I didn't step in. Instead, I turned back toward the other room, the guest room. Smaller. No window seat. No bookshelves. Just a twin bed and a nightstand with a lamp that flickered when I turned it on. I sat on the edge of the mattress. Let the silence settle. By 7, Delphine called for dinner. The table was already set, 3 places. Talia sat across from me, scrolling on her phone until Delphine gave her the look. She set it down with a sigh, then flashed a smile. "So, City Girl returns. Did LA chew you up and spit you out?" I smiled tightly. I left on my own terms. "Sure," she said, loading her plate with roasted chicken. "That's what they all say." Delphine laughed like it was just sisterly teasing. "Talia just got promoted. She's been handling the Mortimer Foundation events. Very impressive." "That's great," I said, pushing green beans around my plate. "And Dad?" "Oh, working late. You know him, always hands-on." Delphine sipped her wine, then added, "He didn't think you'd actually come." I didn't respond. My fingers found the chain of the locket under the table. I clutched it, grounding myself. I glanced around. That photo on the wall. New, definitely. The family was posed in front of the fireplace. Delphine. Dad, Talia, and in the spot where I used to stand, Talia again. Hair curled just right, hand on Dad's shoulder. I stared too long. Delphine followed my gaze. "Oh, that one. Christmas, 2 years ago. We finally got around to updating." I nodded. My fork was still clean. I had no appetite for chicken or lies. Later, I made my way upstairs. Talia and Delphine stayed behind, still chatting like nothing was wrong. In the guest room, I lay on the too-firm mattress, staring at the ceiling. No posters, no glow-in-the-dark stars, no trace I ever lived here. "If your home forgets you," I whispered, "are you still part of it?" The locket was cold against my skin. Comforting, but distant. I turned off the lamp. Just as I started to drift, voices carried through the thin wall. "She's not staying long, is she?" Delphine's voice. "No way," Talia replied. "She doesn't fit here anymore." I didn't flinch. They weren't wrong, but neither were they ready. Morning came like a quiet stranger. The guest room was colder than it had been the night before, as if the house itself had withdrawn its warmth. I had drifted in and out of sleep, haunted by the voices outside my door, those whispers between Delphine and Talia. "She's not staying long, is she?" kept circling my head like an unwelcome song. When I opened my eyes, the ceiling looked foreign again, and for a moment I had to remind myself where I was. No knock, no greeting. Just silence so deliberate it felt like a decision. I wrapped the blanket tighter and sat up. The clock on the nightstand blinked 8:15. In this house, that was late. By the time I reached the kitchen, breakfast had already been cleared. Only crumbs on a plate and a cold pot of coffee waited for me on the counter. No note, no offer, not even a good morning. I poured myself a cup anyway. It tasted burned, but I drank it just to feel something warm. The phone buzzed in my pocket. A missed call from an old college friend. The name on the screen like a small lifeline in a room where everything else felt rigged against me. At least someone still thought of me. I put the phone back, careful not to let my hands tremble. It took me a moment to register what day it was. My own birthday. 37 now. The last time someone here said happy birthday to me was before my mother died. I'd stopped expecting it, but the sting still came, quiet and sharp. I glanced at the empty kitchen doorway, half waiting for someone to appear and say something. Nothing. By mid-afternoon, the house was alive again. Voices, movement, the clatter of dishes. Delphine had announced a family dinner in honor of Talia's promotion. Invitations had gone out to extended relatives without a word to me. I found myself wiping counters, setting out napkins, refilling glasses, doing all the small tasks a ghost might do to prove it's still there. I smiled and nodded, offering to help, careful not to let my face betray the burn of being overlooked. Grace as armor. My hands moved, but inside I was cataloging every slight. Talia breezed through the kitchen in a silk dress, checking her hair in the hallway mirror. "Mom says you can handle the seating," she said without looking at me. Her tone clipped. Mom, not my mom, hers. When the guests arrived, laughter filled the house. That kind of brittle, showy laughter people perform at gatherings. I stayed at the edge of the room, making myself small but watchful. Delphine clinked her glass. "Everyone, this is our guest from New York, Coraline." The words hit me like cold water. Guest? Not daughter? Not family? Just a stranger passing through. I smiled, lips pressed tight, and nodded to the people I hadn't seen since childhood. A few of them gave polite smiles back, already forgetting my face as soon as they turned away. Talia stood at the head of the table, glass in hand. "I couldn't have done any of this without Mom and Dad," she said, her eyes shining with practiced gratitude. My father's chair sat empty, out late, again, but his name still hung in the air like an oath I no longer shared. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not a crack, not a collapse, more like a click, the sound of a lock turning. After dinner, when the guests had gone and Delphine was busy in the kitchen, I slipped upstairs. The attic door creaked like it was surprised to see me. Dust clung to the air. Old fabric boxes lined the wall. Behind one, tucked almost out of sight, was a small wooden box labeled with my initials, CJ. My hands shook as I pulled it free. Inside were fragments of a girl who once lived here, a drawing of my mother and me at the park, a bracelet of pale blue beads I thought I'd lost forever, a photo of us by the lake. Proof. Not just memory. Proof that I hadn't imagined my place here. Proof that I belonged once. At the bottom of the box, folded and creased, was a note. The ink had bled in places, but the handwriting was hers, my mother's. She had written, "Come home when you're ready. I'll be waiting." It had never been delivered. My chest tightened, but I didn't cry. Not here, not now. I held the bracelet in my palm, the beads cool against my skin, and looked up at the moonlight cutting through the attic window. The silence around me didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like a pause before something new. "You can't erase someone who still remembers," I whispered. It wasn't sorrow. It was clarity. A voice I'd almost forgotten started to speak inside me again. Steady, deliberate, my own. I pulled out my phone and opened a message thread I hadn't touched in years. My fingers hovered, then typed, "Can you talk?" I woke before sunrise, the house still wrapped in shadows. A faint murmur drifted up from downstairs, too soft to catch every word, but heavy enough to set my pulse on edge. Delphine's low voice, then Talia's, like two hands weaving a net they thought I couldn't see. I sat by the window and pulled the curtain back. Outside, autumn leaves scraped along the sidewalk, their edges curling like old secrets. Every gust felt like it carried another whisper of what I wasn't supposed to know. I reached under my shirt and touched the locket, the one piece of my mother that never left me. The cool metal steadied me the way a dock steadies a boat rocking against the current. Downstairs, the hum of conversation stopped. Footsteps shifted. A door closed. The house returned to its stillness, but my chest stayed tight. By the time I came into the kitchen, the two of them were already seated. The table was set, but not for me. Talia scrolled on her phone. Delphine stirred her tea. Neither of them looked up. I poured my own coffee, the silence between us stretching like a wire pulled too thin. "Morning," I said. Nothing came back but the clink of a spoon against porcelain. I tried again later, when Delphine stood at the sink. "I remembered a trip Dad took me on." She cut in before I could finish, her voice sweet enough to sting. "Oh, honey, don't strain yourself. New York must have worn you out." Talia smirked without lifting her eyes. My fingers curled around the mug until my knuckles went white. I swallowed the words burning at the back of my throat. Delphine turned, drying her hands. "You should be grateful you were raised at all." Her tone was light, almost joking, but the air in the room shifted. Even Talia glanced up. I felt the words land like a stamp pressed over my name. Guest? Outsider? Mistake. I smiled, a tight, careful thing, and excused myself before the bitterness spilled out. The living room smelled faintly of lemon polish. On the far wall hung a portrait of my father with Delphine. I had seen it before, but today my eyes caught a detail I'd missed. The frame was scratched on the back. I lifted it down, turned it over, carved into the wood, faint but unmistakable. C.W. belongs here. The smell of cinnamon tea, wood creaking under every step. A different world than the museum of indifference I was living in down the street. She didn't waste time. Sat me on the floral couch, handed me a yellowing envelope, my name written in my mother's handwriting. I held on to it. I was waiting for the right time, Evelyn said, then added, "Delphine tried to get it from me once, offered money, then threats. I told her to get off my porch and never come back." I opened the envelope with shaky fingers. The letter inside was dated 4 months before my mother passed. Her words were soft, but urgent. She spoke of watching Delphine twist her way into the family, how she noticed things, isolation, control, how my father began to fade from their shared decisions. She ended with one line that stayed burned into me. "Don't ever let her rewrite who you are." I didn't cry, not right then. I folded the letter back into the envelope like it was glass. Evelyn watched me with the patience of someone who'd seen wars play out at kitchen tables. I thanked her, hugged her tighter than I meant to. Then I walked home, the letter in my coat pocket feeling less like paper and more like steel. That evening, I sat at dinner, back in the icy quiet of the Mortimer house. I didn't announce anything, just waited for the right moment. As Talia laughed about a coworker, I interjected calmly. "Mom used to hum when she made spaghetti. I'd sit on the counter and she'd give me little tastes from fear anymore. It was something closer to readiness." The letter from my mother lay open on the nightstand, its folds softer now from my constant touching. Beside it sat the photograph with the scratched words on the back. I reread the email draft to my father on my phone. My thumb hovered over send, but I locked the screen again. Not yet. Timing mattered. I gathered the pieces slowly. The letter, the photo, copies I'd made of both, a few other things I'd tucked away for years. I slipped them into a plain folder and then into my bag. Before leaving the room, I caught my own reflection in the window. Same eyes, different posture. I whispered, "This ends today," then opened the door and stepped into the hall. Downstairs smelled of coffee and maple syrup. Delphine was already in the kitchen, bright smile fixed like a mask. The table was set for brunch. 2 women from the neighborhood were there, both old friends of my father's. "Good morning," Delphine chirped. "This is my sister's guest, Coraline. She's been staying with us for a bit." The words landed like a slap. I opened my mouth, but she cut me off with a laugh. "You must forgive her," she said to the women. "City life wears people out. She's a little stressed." Talia smirked over her coffee. "Don't get dramatic," she muttered just loud enough. I stayed seated, hands folded. Inside, I was memorizing everything. Tone, posture, every little performance. "It's interesting," I said softly, "how people remember things differently when it suits them." Delphine's smile didn't budge. Oh, sweetheart, you should be grateful you were raised at all. Not everyone's that lucky. One of the guests shifted uncomfortably. Talia reached for another roll. I stared at my stepmother, not blinking. She wanted me to explode so she could point and say, unstable. I didn't give her that. I just sipped my coffee and filed the moment away like evidence. After the guests left, I asked my father quietly for a moment in the study. He hesitated but followed. The room smelled like old books and cedar polish. I closed the door, opened my folder, and laid out the letter, the scratched photo, a picture of my room before it had been changed. This is what she's done, I said. My voice didn't shake. This isn't imagination. This is real. He sat down, hands clasped. His eyes moved from the letter to the photo. His mouth opened, then shut. He looked tired, like a man who'd been living with a story he couldn't admit even to himself. Then the door swung open. Delphine walked in holding a crisp document. Since we're airing things out, she said, let's end this properly. She slid the paper across the desk. A family peace agreement. Sign here and relinquish your claims to the house. Everyone moves on. I stared at it. My father's gaze flickered, but he didn't speak. You're serious, I said. I'm practical, she replied. You've always been too sentimental to survive in this family. I stood, tore the paper clean down the middle, and let the pieces fall to the carpet. I'm done playing your games. Her lips tightened, but she said nothing. My father's hand twitched on the armrest, but he stayed silent. I went upstairs, my bag still slung over my shoulder, clutching the torn paper like proof. In the bathroom mirror, I looked at my own face. Same eyes, no trace of the girl who used to wait for her father's protection. This is not negotiable, I typed into a text to my father and pressed send. Downstairs, the house was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes just before a storm breaks. I woke up with the same weight in my chest, but it felt different this time. Less like dread, more like direction. I sat up and turned toward the nightstand where the letter and the photograph waited, silent reminders of everything I hadn't said yet. I placed them carefully back into the folder, added the copies I'd made, and zipped it closed like someone preparing for court. The air in the house felt off. Quieter. I passed Delphine in the hallway. She didn't stop me, just smiled faintly and kept walking like nothing had happened. Talia sat at the kitchen table texting, her foot tapping fast under the chair. They were uneasy, I could feel it. That alone told me I was closer than they thought. I opened my phone and typed a message to my father. I'd like to meet, just you and me, somewhere neutral. I hit send. Then I slipped on my shoes and stepped out back into the garden. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the gravel. Delphine stood near the roses with a hose in one hand, pretending to be unbothered. She didn't turn around, just said, "Lovely evening." I walked up beside her, folder in hand. I found the letter, and the photo with the inscription. She looked at me, lips tight. "You imagined that. You're seeing what you want to see." "No," I said. "I'm seeing what's been hidden." Her eyes flicked down to the folder. "You don't understand what family means. I understand enough to know you tried to erase me." She turned off the hose. Water dripped onto her shoes. "You're twisting facts. Always have. You're not well, Coraline." Talia's voice cut through from behind. "Here we go again. Nancy Drew with a grudge." I didn't flinch. "Mock me all you want. You won't rewrite history." Delphine stepped closer. "You're digging up ghosts. They won't help you." "I'm not looking for help," I said. "I'm telling the truth." Then a voice behind us, soft, clear, familiar. "This truth must be seen." We turned. My mother stood at the edge of the garden path, not in a dream, not in a memory, real. Her scarf fluttered slightly in the breeze. She looked smaller than I remembered, but her eyes held steel. Delphine stepped back. "Marisol." My mother walked forward. "No, no more lying. No more silence." Talia looked stunned, for once speechless. My mother turned to Delphine. "I let you speak for me too long. I let you twist my absence into something convenient, but she is our blood. You cannot erase her." Delphine's mouth curled. You always did confuse softness with strength. And you mistook cruelty for order. For a moment, the garden was silent. Even the wind held its breath. I pulled out my phone, turned on the camera, and aimed it square at Delphine's face. "I won't wait anymore," I said. "Soon the world will see what you've hidden." Delphine took a step back. Talia muttered something and disappeared into the house. My mother didn't speak again. She simply stood beside me. That was enough. We walked inside together. I felt her hand graze mine, warm, steady. I reached for the locket at my neck and touched the small dent in its side, one I'd pressed in myself during a crying fit years ago. She noticed, squeezed my hand. I whispered, "We're not alone anymore." Back in my room, I opened my phone. A new message blinked on the screen. No number, just a video attachment, labeled Truth. The air felt still, not peaceful. More like the kind of stillness that happens before a storm breaks open. I sat at my desk with the folder spread out. Everything in its place. Letter, photo, recordings, and that frame where my face used to be before Delphine's careful edits. Every item had been double-checked. No inconsistencies. Dates lined up. The handwriting matched. The stories in the recordings lined up with the moments I remembered in my bones. The weight of it all wasn't crushing tonight. It was fuel. I sent a text to my father, then to the rest of the family. One final gathering. Dusk, please come. I didn't expect silence in response, but that's what I got. Didn't matter. I closed the folder, tucked it under my arm, and walked down the hallway, passing the old portrait of us 3 kids. I stopped, glanced at Talia's smile in the photo. Even there, her eyes looked like they were watching someone else's downfall. The sun had already dipped below the fence line when I stepped into the garden. Chairs were lined up unevenly. My father stood near the edge, hands clasped in front like he was waiting to be sentenced. The others followed, neighbors, cousins, even some friends I hadn't seen in years. The kind of crowd that doesn't show up unless they smell scandal. I stepped into the center. "I won't waste your time," I began. "You've been fed stories for years. Here's the truth." I held up the letter from my mother. She wrote this months before she passed, warning me about Delphine. Murmurs rose. I passed it to the front row, letting the words speak for themselves. I showed the photo, the inscription. This was mine. She removed me. Delphine stood up. "Enough, Coraline. You've embarrassed yourself." "No," I said, raising my voice just enough. "You've erased people. You've rewritten a family." Talia pulled out her phone. "Smile, everyone," she said, going live. Coraline's final meltdown, but I was ready. I pulled out my phone, tapped the screen. "You like live streams? Here's yours." The audio crackled to life. Delphine's voice, cold, calculating. "No one will believe her, not if we act fast." Gasps. A few people turned toward her. She moved to speak. I lifted a hand. "There's more." Then my mother stepped forward. "She's telling the truth," Marisol said, steady. "I was there. I stayed silent for too long." Delphine's mouth parted, but no words came. "She tried to silence both of us," Marisol continued. "But you can't cover blood with paint." The crowd grew restless. Questions rose in every direction. I pressed play on the second clip. My father's voice, this time, speaking in his office, unaware he was being recorded. "She won't fight back. We'll just sign it all under Delphine. It'll look cleaner." That did it. You could feel the axis shift. Whispers turned to stunned silence. Then someone stood up and said, "You knew?" Another voice, "That's fraud." Delphine's hands shook. She turned toward my father. He didn't look at her. He didn't look at anyone. I took one step forward. "I tried to do this quietly," I said. "Gave warnings. Showed the truth." Delphine stumbled for words. "You've twisted everything. You've always been—" "I've been quiet, not blind." I pulled the final paper from my bag, held it up. "This," I said, "is a court summons, filed this morning. Mortimer Faz, Delphine Mortimer." Someone let out a sharp breath. Talia dropped her phone. I looked at Delphine one last time. "You had your chance. Now the law gets the final say." The courtroom was colder than I remembered. Maybe it was just me, bracing. I walked in slow, steady, not for drama, just because my legs knew it mattered. Delphine sat to the left, her hands clasped too tight, her eyes twitching, not the same woman who once smirked across dinner tables. There was no show left in her, just worry and calculation. I sat, nodded politely to the judge, then placed the folder on the table in front of me like it was just another day at work. The letter, the photos, the recordings, everything was there, lined up, honest. Marisol gave her testimony first. Her voice was even, low, but clear. She didn't stammer, didn't shake, just facts. And her truth. I saw the way the judge leaned forward during her statement, absorbing every word like it was scripture. When I took the stand, I didn't look at Delphine. I didn't need to. My focus was on getting it right. Every name, every date. No emotion in my tone, but my chest. It carried weight. I wasn't shaking. I'd already done my crying in places where no one could hear. Then came my father. He stood, voice rough, older than the last time I really listened to him. He admitted it, his silence, his failure to speak up when it mattered. I should have protected my daughter, he said. I should have never let her be erased. He didn't look at Delphine either, just the floor. The judge took it all in. When he ruled in my favor, he did so without drama. Just a steady voice reading the truth out loud. But when he said there would be a separate investigation into financial misdeeds, I saw Delphine grip the edge of her seat like she was falling. I didn't smile, I didn't gloat, I just breathed. That evening, I returned home to a strange silence. Some cousins were there, unsure if they should hug me or just nod. A few offered quiet apologies, awkward like folks trying to tiptoe across broken glass. I didn't make it easier for them, but I didn't make it harder either. Dad handed me a box. Your mother's, he said, barely above a whisper. Inside, letters. Some photos I'd never seen. One of me in her arms, both of us mid-laugh. I had no memory of it, but it felt real enough to sting. Marisol touched my hand. You did what I never could, she said. I let some people back in. Others, I didn't. Not out of bitterness, just clarity. Some wounds only close when you stop picking at them. I walked the house one last time, noticing how the air no longer felt heavy. I placed that photo, me and Mom, back on the mantle where it should have always been. I packed slowly the next morning. No rush, no exile, just movement. I wasn't leaving behind anything. I was choosing what came next. The lake house wasn't big, but it was hers. Now mine. I filled it with the scent of cedar and open windows. No ghosts, just stories. Truth isn't easy, but silence? That'll kill you from the inside out. Before I left town, I met Gabe Hartley one last time. He handed me papers, a few legal contacts. In case you ever want to turn that fire into something bigger, he said. I don't know if I'll use them, but it felt good to know someone saw my fire and didn't try to put it out. I took one last look at the town as I pulled away. It didn't look smaller. I'd just outgrown the shame it tried to wrap around me. And I left with nothing hidden. To anyone out there who's been told to stay quiet, your voice is yours. Use it. I hung the court decree in a frame, not to boast, but to remind myself. I lived through it. I spoke through it. Then, just as I began settling into my new life by the lake, a letter arrived. Not addressed to me, but to her, Marisol. The postmark wasn't old. It was recent, too recent. The return address read, from someone who knew what really happened back then,